Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dirt Road Divinity. I'm Lisa Wade, your host, and I am so excited to be talking today with Frank Wood. Frank, hi.
Hi, Lisa.
It's been a long time. It's been a
It
long
has been
time.
like 2.5 years,
Whew,
at least.
you've had a lot of changes in your life over 2.5 years, going from
Yes.
Central Texas to now Central Oregon in an incredible dual partnership with your beautiful, incredibly intelligent and sassy new wife, Stephanie, but also
Yeah,
business partners too. That's a whole lot in a short amount of time. How's
it
the journey
is.
been?
It is. It's been awesome.
I
It
love
really has.
that. Now, when we met, we had the opportunity to meet during the School for Spiritual Direction program, a 2-year interfaith spiritual direction program at the Osage Forest of Peace in Oklahoma. And you would drive up from Texas. And I'm going to be honest, you were the person in the class that completely fascinated me. And I think part of it had to do with Mr. Potato Head as one of the centerpieces to your altar at home. But it sounds like you have had a fascinating spiritual journey from being steeped in kind of traditional mainstream Christianity growing up to being on a bit of a different path these days. Can you tell us a little bit about that road and where you are and how you got there?
Sure, I'll try.
Big
I
question.
uh, I grew up in a conservative family. Although my parents voted for Obama and will probably never vote Republican again, but I grew up in a conservative tradition. They were not religious people, but um, they made sure that I had, a good education, and part of that was going to um, private Episcopal school, high school mainly. So I grew up in that tradition. So that was always present. My grandmother was very, very faithful. I can remember spending the night at my grandmother's house when I was a little boy, and she had a sofa, fold out sofa in her bedroom, and she folded out for us when we stayed over. And every night, last thing she did before she turned off her life is she would get on her knees in her nightgown and her hairnet and everything, and just say her prayers and rub her face, and just, I mean, she was praying. It was obvious, and she didn't, care if I did or not. Sometimes I did with her, sometimes I didn't, but she would pray. And then in the morning when she rode out of bed, she would get on her knees first thing and pray.
Mm.
Um, but that's just who she was. I As I grew older and started thinking, I became agnostic just because I didn't understand and didn't get it. And the thing that really drove me to seriously consider God, um, I never understood that personal relationship to me. I didn't understand that. I didn't really deny the existence that there could be something, because to me, atheism is illogical. You're denying the existence of something. If it doesn't exist, there's no need to deny it. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So why even argue the point? So I was never atheist, but I was agnostic because I did not know. And hitting a bottom with alcohol and drugs, all, at least the 12-step recovery I've been exposed to, is centered around finding a relationship with a power greater than yourself, with your creator. And so that forced me to start taking a look at it. And in that process, because 12-step recovery says, use your own concept of God. You don't have to necessarily believe what somebody else says you need to believe, but just ask yourself honestly from inside, what does all this mean to you?
Mm.
That encouraged me to do that. And in doing that, solely for the purpose of staying sober and not falling off the wagon, I did what was suggested, and eventually had a spiritual experience where now I know that God exists. It's not, I no reason to argue it, because I know what I know. that there is a God, and I do have a relationship with God today. But don't ask me to define God, because I can't define God. I just know
Mm.
that there is God.
So would you say, thank you for sharing all of that. And would you say that it was in finding your own relationship that has helped with your recovery and staying sober for how long now?
It'll be 37 years in March. I got sober when I was 20.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So you found your experience of God as a fairly young man, but after some struggle beforehand.
Yes. 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 And then struggle afterwards. Uh, we were talking before you turned on the record, and there's a saying in recovery that pain is the touchstone of all spiritual growth, and that's been my experience. I'll get spiritual and kind of have everything lined up and everything going great, and the second I become aware that, wow, things are going really good, this faith stuff really works, and doing the right thing really works, and thinking of others really works, as soon as I become conscious that wow, I've never had it this good, I know that growth is coming. So just enjoy it while it lasts, however long this is going to last, because sure enough, new challenges come up in life that push me further to
Mhm.
look deeper. But it's always, I'm going through one right now, and I just had the revelation a couple of days ago. Gets back to faith. Where's your faith, Frank?
Mhm.
Do you really trust? Do you really committed to doing the things that demonstrate faith? Because that's my only option today. I can try to do all this other stuff in the world, and we have to make a living, and we have material desires and wants, even if we're spiritual. I mean, one of my I wore this today for Valentine's Day because it's red, but one of my deals is I've been a Porsche freak since I was probably 11 years old, and we have one in the garage right now. It's 20 years old and used, but it's a Porsche, and I'm
Mhm.
just fascinated by the cars. That's part of who I am. And there was a time when I gave all that up, and was trying to live this, I guess, aesthetic life, and that's just not for me. I'm not monk material. I don't belong in a monastery, and I know that because I visited a monastery and hung out for about a week till they told me I stayed long enough. I didn't belong there.
I'll bet there are some good stories to go along with that. I think part of the opportunity is, can we hold our faith and be in the world at the same time? This idea of finding ourselves in our relationship, with the divine in a cave at 10,000 feet in the air, isn't, for those of us living in, a society like the US, or that's not realistic. And
Right.
I think it's so much harder in some ways, to remember that connection, to remember that faith, to remember to be soul or heart driven, as opposed to selfishly driven, while walking around trying to do things like pay the bills and, fill the car up with gas and get out from behind the slow jackrabbit in line at the grocery store, whatever else. It's like there's an opportunity to grow at every corner. And
Yeah.
being a Porsche guy is okay. I'm guessing your version of the creator, your relationship with the creator doesn't say, now, Frank, that makes you less godly. Yeah.
No, I don't think he cares.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
It's not really an issue either way.
But I think that there's something real about recognizing for you what brings you joy. What brings you joy? And what brings you joy? You're a Porsche guy. I'm a Jeep girl. So, a
Mhm.
little different there, but we know that those two things bring us joy. And so leaning
Yes.
into that instead of leaning away from it. There was a time, within the past year and a half, I kept thinking I needed to sell my Jeep. I mean, it's a 74. I'm not a wrench turner myself necessarily, and these things need upkeep. Thought this doesn't make any sense. But every time I went to try to sell it, it was like my soul would say, please don't, please don't. And I would just get this sinking feeling inside, just inside. I was like, oh, And when I finally decided, nope, I got to keep this, I got to keep this thing and take the top off of it and enjoy it. And it's crazy how I feel more me and feel more connected to my soul and to the divine when I'm out in the woods driving that thing. It's not, might
Yeah.
not be everybody else's cup of tea, but recognizing what that thing is for you or for me and being willing to lean into it and not shamed out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Because there's an awful lot of blame, shame, stuff that goes around even within the spiritual community that, oh, well, if you're attached to something, you're doing it wrong.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's kind of crap. Kind of crap.
Yeah.
So, with your experiences, you talked about trying to lead a more minimalist, lifestyle, non-attached to stuff, recognizing that the monastery wasn't the path for you. What drew you to the spiritual direction school at Osage?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. I think that's just part of my seeking. I had years ago, I had gone to a retreat, a men's retreat with Richard Rohr.
Hmm.
This was 25 years ago. So I'm always drawn to those types of activities when they come up. And I don't even, uh, well, I do know. Had a friend who we know, Vanessa, who spent a lot of time at the Osage Forest of Peace and talked about how great it was. So I went there one weekend just to relax and get away,
Hmm.
and saw a flyer, for the School of Spiritual Direction, and it just resonated with me. That was the next thing as part of my, and I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know, if I'd actually become a spiritual director. Um, and it really hadn't led to that, but it's enabled my growth and ability to listen and understand and be more open-minded with everyone.
I love that. I was going to ask what your bigger takeaways were from that particular program. Some people lean in thinking I will become a spiritual director and serve others in that way. That wasn't the path I ended up taking with it, but I sure found um, increased faith, to go back to that word, that like spirit had my back when I
Mhm.
quieted myself enough to really listen to who was on the other side of the conversation, and then also listen for clear answers and direction from spirit, whatever, holy spirit, whatever the term is used for that. um that's where I leaned in and learned that being willing to serve from a place of an open heart, spirit was always going to be there, even when I
Yes.
didn't have, when my mind, logical mind, didn't have the answers. I could trust, even with difficult situation, difficult questions from a client, that I could trust spirit
Mhm.
to give me the answer they needed, not because it was the answer I needed or that my mind could come up with, but it was the one they needed. So I love that an increased ability to listen and to lean in was something that you came away from that with. Now, you had, if I remember correctly, had quite a meditation practice. Now, did you study Buddhism at one point?
Not official, not formally, but I lean Buddhist. I mean, a little bit Native American stuff. I smudge almost every morning.
Yep.
That just something that I started doing, and I like it, and it's a good ritual for me. Um, and I lean Buddhist. I went through, been divorced twice now, and after my second divorce, I had such grief because what I learned from my first divorce was how selfish and self-centered I was, and how I should not have done that. And so when I made the vows the second time, I was going to hang in there till she killed me. I mean, I was, I wasn't leaving, and and it was so painful to lose my identity as a father and provider and husband. My whole identity was wrapped up in this belief that I was going to do it right this time, and not that I did, but I was trying, and that was what I wanted. um, Fell way short, and she let me know it. um, it was so painful. And I went to several divorce recovery classes at 3 different churches, read a couple of books. And it wasn't until I read, and I'm not sure I can remember the name of the book, but it's a Buddhist book on grief that, and I was already kind of had read lots of Buddhist stuff and followed that, but that book made the most sense to me about what I'd experienced and what I was going through. And so it just solidified, my Buddhist angle. I don't really identify as anything
Mhm.
except a child of God,
I love that.
which I believe we all are.
Yeah.
We're all equal in that respect.
Mm, that's beautiful. Tell me about Mr. Potato Head. I
Mr.
remember.
Potato Head. I actually had to dig out Mr. Potato Head. So I've got an altar, and it sits on a wooden box, and I have all my keepsakes in there. And what's on the altar? There is a Buddha on the altar. That's probably always going to be there because a friend of mine gave me this really beautiful little Buddha. But what's on my altar changes from time to time. So I had Mr. Potato Head was in the box in storage, but I pulled Mr. Potato Head out because, so for everybody,
Mhm.
that's Mr. Potato Head from altar, who sits inside the altar today. But he may go back out now, though. I don't know. Maybe I need to put him out for this reason. And the reason I had him out before is that I get so serious and so intense about what I'm doing in life and being spiritual and working hard and being a good husband and being a good father that I miss the journey because I'm so darn intentional about everything I'm trying to do. And I forget not to take myself so damn seriously. So
Mhm.
Mr. Potato Head is there to remind me not to take stuff so seriously, to not get so wrapped up in the details and the minutia and to relax. So thank you for bringing up Mr. Potato Head. He's definitely going back on the altar for a while
That
because I
I
need that right now.
Well, when you brought that up at Osage Forest of Peace that day and explained just what you explained, I saw myself in your rationale. And I was like, oh, I need to chill out. I
Yeah,
ju- I need to allow this to actually be joyful and actually be fun instead of making it some drudgery, to where, oh, the morning ritual and the prayer and the meditation, it all has to be a certain way without any spontaneity or flow or freedom
right.
and so for me, your Mr. Potato Head has actually been a good touch point for me too. So, I've got little goofy things on my, around my area that kind of remind me of your Mr. Potato Head, like my little Yoda and like this
Perfect.
little guy. And I mean, just all kinds of stuff that remind me that the spiritual work doesn't necessarily have to feel like pain, even though pain might be the touchstone that leads to spiritual growth, the process doesn't have to be painful necessarily. We can have fun in the
Right.
meditation. We can have fun in life. We can have fun connecting with God. And I think that there's been like this. You talked about your grandmother when you were growing up, and I remember, going to my grandmother's house, but it was my great grandmother that, whoo, she was very, very devout, very devout Southern Baptist, and it was so serious, so serious. And I remember as a kid thinking, this isn't much fun. This
Mm.
isn't much fun. And so for some of us, bringing that fun back actually makes it more likely that we want to develop that relationship
Mm-hmm.
with the creator.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. One thing I noticed in doing a little stalking about you is that you have lived in some pretty spectacular places. So we got Park City, Utah, Whitefish, Montana, Aspen, now Bend,
Mm-hmm.
Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Are you drawn to big, beautiful places, or what's the story with this? Because those to me are all places that are quite naturally beautiful.
Yeah. I moved to Park City soon after I got sober because we have a saying in 12-step recovery: to thine own self be true. Now, I
Mhm.
don't think it means to selfishly run off and be a ski bum, but that's how I interpreted it at 21 years old. So that's what I did. But I love skiing and the outdoors and camping and love the mountains. I went to a wilderness camp when I was 15 or 16 in Colorado, where we spent 3 weeks living in tents and took long hikes and did some solo camping, and which was not, at the time I didn't understand how spiritual it was, but I can remember coming over after a long hike and hiking through snow with the guys I was with, and coming over a peak and looking down on a glacial lake. And
Mm.
I think that was my first conscious spiritual experience, because it was absolutely the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I felt it in my soul. And that was the first time that, again, I was conscious. So moving to Park City, Utah to be a ski bum when I was young, and then about 10 years later, moving to Montana as part of my spiritual journey, and it may sound weird, but I had this calling to go to Montana, and I cannot explain that. It's not rational, it's not logical, but this was at a time when I first really began to have, when I had that experience where I knew that God was within me the whole
Mm.
time, that it had just been obscured by my mind and my trying to figure stuff out, obscured by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things. But in the last analysis, it's only there deep down within that God can be found. And that was my experience. So as part of listening to that inner voice, I believed it was God's will for me to go to Montana. Now can't today say whether I know it was or not. I just know that's what I did, and it was a great experience to live in Whitefish, Kalispell area, and good time for me to get away from the busy life in Dallas and kind of refocus. I did end up moving back to Dallas, Texas, and stayed there for another 10 years until my ex-wife that I've referred to, uh, said we were moving to Aspen, Colorado. And logically it made no sense, but I love skiing in the mountains. So that's what we did, and
Yeah.
did that for 2 years, and then moving to Bend, again, was not my plan. Although um, when I moved to Montana, my plan at the time was to move to Hood River, Oregon, where I could ski in the winters and windsurf in the summers, because that's what I was focused on then. That's what I love to do. And I didn't make it because I was sidetracked by this inner calling to go to Montana. And I know all that sounds weird and stuff, but that's, it was all inner driven, my desire to go someplace different. And so the fact that I ended up in Bend, Oregon 25 years later is an interesting coincidence to me, and how I ended up here. Um,
Coincidence.
I mean, I just, I try to go with the flow. I don't do a very good job sometimes, I feel like, because I'm trying to make stuff happen and, be responsible and everything. But this is just where I ended up again. And it's
Mm.
cool. It's super cool here.
Love that. When we first met, I had a I'm not surprised that you had a spiritual experience in nature. I could definitely see that about you. And so thank you for sharing that, you had that feeling when looking over, the lake and being there in the mountains. When we first met at the beginning of the School for Spiritual Direction, I remember stuff was a little challenging in your life. I mean, job situation was a little challenging. I don't think there was a relationship situation at the time, and there were
Oh,
months. Yeah.
there's always a relationship
Okay.
situation with me.
But I remember it just felt like it was more challenged than not often.
Mhm.
And then things turned around, and
Mhm.
new opportunities, and like your energy so dramatically shifted, and I mean that in the best possible way. Like to see you light up with joy as a friend, to watch that, it was like, oh my gosh, this is a beautiful thing. What was that all about? How did that come about? And did you even notice it for yourself? It was
Oh
obvious.
yeah.
Did
Oh
you know
yeah.
for you? Okay.
It, again, pain is a touchstone of all spiritual growth. I had, when I started the school for spiritual direction, I was in a relationship, which was, it was a third performance for me and this woman. I
Got it.
dated her a little when I was very young and was terrified of her, uh, and did not get that involved, and then tried again years later, and it was a disaster. But she came back around, and God bless me. I just want to love and be helpful, and so that's what I was trying to, just love her and be helpful in it. And it did not work again. It was a very painful experience. And it wouldn't be appropriate to go into the details, but it was a painful experience. But because of that, I had always had this idea that I would have a soulmate. And and I think that was driven, and some people would say, well, it's love addiction, and I identify with that. But I finally got to a point where I realized that my ability to pick and choose a relationship was not going to work, because none of them had worked. They either ended in divorce or some kind of drama. It didn't work. So for the first time in my life, while I was at the School of Spiritual Direction, I made a decision to 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 basically, be celibate on a sabbatical for a year from all relationships, and was, for the first time in my life, I basically said, I can't do this anymore. I can't seem to pick the right partner. I'm turning this over to you, God, and I'm going to take a year off as my demonstration, and just not even worry about it. And no matter what happens, I'm not going to get involved with anybody, and or even act like I can. um, and that was very freeing, because I finally began to understand what people talk about when they say you got to love yourself. And I realized that I could be perfectly happy by myself, that I had not needed another person's validation or love or affection to feel okay. I quit seeking happiness from somebody else, and in doing that, I got very free. And I think God knew that there wasn't any way. I'd gone about 6 months. There wasn't any way I was going to make it a year. So I guess he had mercy on me and presented with me with my wife today, because it's the best relationship I've ever had,
Mm.
and on paper, it should not have worked. It should have never worked. There's just no way. She lived in Oregon. I lived in Texas. She had, 4 kids here and a career here. I had my kids living with me at the time in Texas, and it just didn't seem like it could work, but it's just worked. It's just worked unbelievably well, and just kind of happened. And we're just on that journey to where now we're um, working together in a partnership, and you know going to make the most of that. So
That's incredible. And watching you from afar, at least over social media, seem incredibly happy.
yeah.
And
And
it's
it really is. Somebody made the comment the other day, uh, uh, well, our boss, looking at y'all social media, it looks like y'all are just ridiculously happy, but it's social media, kind of like, really? And I told him it is absolutely as disgusting as it looks. We are so in love and work so well together.
Mm.
It's disgusting,
You guys give me
but
hope.
it's beautiful.
It is
It's just
beautiful.
awesome.
It's
And it's not that there aren't challenges, and usually because I say something insensitive, but
at least
and
you
have
know
to
this.
apologize, and let her be, have her feelings for a little while till she gets over me being insensitive. But it's great.
I have a feeling she's the kind of gal who probably doesn't let you get away with a whole lot either.
No.
I
And it
like that
surprises
about
me when
her.
she does.
Oh, and perhaps that's part of the perfect match.
Yeah.
So you guys are now in business in real estate. So real estate in Central Oregon. And
Yes.
how are you enjoying that? That's it. That's a career shift for you, kind of a different approach, isn't it? You
Yeah,
were
that's something that I've always wanted to do and never felt like I was in a position to do it. And again, it's just something that kind of materialized, and the opportunity became available, and it's it's just working. It's a lot of unknowns. Have to have a lot of faith working on straight commission, and it's the market's interesting all over the country because there's a shortage of inventory, and prices are going crazy high, and interest rates are low, and it's an interesting time. But I really believe in abundance, and there's plenty out there for people that are positive and have faith and just do the right thing, and operate from a mindset of abundance, and everything's fine today. Have everything we could ever need or want today. Don't know what's going to happen 3 months from now, but today everything's fine. And I really have learned to embrace that, today, because that's really all we have.
that's such an important shift, from worrying about the future to appreciating what you have or what exists in the present. That because worrying about the future is crazy making stuff, is what
Mhm.
I've realized. And it's almost the opposite of faith in a lot of ways. And you had talked about faith earlier and leaning into your faith, even when, not having all the answers. But if we had all the answers, who would need faith, right? I mean,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
and I've found that I can lean into faith on some things. For example, when I got the inner calling, hey, need you to go buy a ticket to take a solo journey to Egypt, a year ago in November. I'm like, okay, God, you got my back. Keep me safe. Tell me where to go, what you want me to do. And I'm in. It wasn't a problem for me to have faith in that instance at all, which would freak a lot of people out. But like in my business, like faith there and on the real 3D, like money and paying
Mhm.
bills and those kinds of things. It's interesting how for some of us faith is easier in some areas than
Mhm.
in others. Faith in people or relationships or whatever. And how have you kind of brought yourself to where you can find faith regardless of the topic, if that
Mhm.
makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it made me think. In fact, I think I just had a realization that if I know I'm not in control of something, faith is easy. It's only when I suffer from the illusion that I have control or more control than I really have that becomes a challenge. You know, I don't have control over what other people are going to do. I have control over how I present myself. I have control over what actions I take, but I don't have control over what they do. And in the world and in business and in sales, it, it's all about taking control and taking the action. And this is in your control, and you create your own destiny
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So it's a catch 22. You
Mhm.
know, I have to take the right action. And when I take the right action and know that I've done my best to take the right action, it seems easier to have faith.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Where does the word surrender hit you? Or how does that word hit you?
Um, oh, that's such an interesting question. It's a long word. If you look at it, it's just kind of a long word. Um, surrender is the secret, and I always have to go through a process of surrender in everything, but it's so hard to do because is it surrender or is it giving up? And I
Mm.
think there's a difference between surrender and giving up, on some level. And it's not, I don't think of surrender, although it is giving up, it's surrendering to a different way. It's not surrendering to an enemy or surrendering to a foe for me anymore. It's surrendering to the light, to the love, to what's good.
Mhm.
I need to surrender to that. Does that I have no idea what I'm talking about. You're just asking questions.
Well, that's one of the things that, when I often will think of faith, the word surrender comes along with it. And you were talking about take the next right action, as long as you know that you're taking the right action. And, for me, it was this idea of active surrender. Like God shows up in the shower one day with this whole
Mhm,
conversation about surrender. And I got a little pissed and I'm like, I don't freaking know how to do that. A little bit of a control freak.
mhm.
I don't know how to do that. Explain it. And it was like, God said, look, it's a simple equation. Basically align with the soul, align with the divine, allow that light, that goodness, that grace to flow to and through me, and then take aligned action. So actually take the action that's in alignment with what I'm learning when I allow and when I align. And I was like, oh, well, that doesn't seem so that doesn't seem so difficult. But I found that every time I get up in my head and use the phrase figure it out,
Mm,
figure it out to me is the trigger of, oh, I'm out of flow, or I'm
yeah.
trying to control this rather than surrendering to something that has the potential to be much greater than anything my little brain could figure out,
Yes.
on its own. And so that's a topic that I think about a lot. And so as you were talking about faith and taking the next right action, this idea of surrender came up, but I think you're exactly right that it's surrendering to what? And to that goodness, that grace, that light, that love, that's better part of what's possible,
Mhm.
rather than the little box that we can
Yeah.
shove ourselves into sometimes when we're trying to control everything. How's that played out in I would like to talk about recovery for a minute, if you don't
Sure.
mind. Before we got on the call, you'd asked the question if my husband had passed away, and yes, and it was um, complete liver failure that was alcohol related. And I don't think I've actually said that out loud, like in a public setting. So thank you. Um, but one of the things I recognized with his journey was also kind of a denial of, like, the term God just pissed him off. Like he would get angry at that. And so, some of the things that you talked about in terms of your journey, I could see in him, but then you made the decision for something different and a different path in your life. What do you mind sharing? Like, what helped you get to that space inside your own mind or heart or whatever, that, hey, I want to try something new, and to actually surrender, or lean into, maybe I don't know the best way to do this, and maybe with a little help, from the divine, from others. I don't know if you attended meetings with the 12-step program, and sponsor, and just the whole structure that's there. But how
Right.
did that make a difference for you? And is there anything that you've noticed for others that have been part of their that recovery has been a part of their life and process as well, that is related to spirituality, or just the choice to choose yourself? What do you see as being the thing that helps people make that choice?
Boy, if we could figure that out,
Yeah.
we could heal the world, because I don't know it's different for everybody.
Mhm.
I can only share my experience, and I think being brought up, in a conservative, relatively healthy family environment, and being raised and going to church, you know, based education, prepared me for when things got ugly when I was using, to realize that I didn't belong in some of the situations that I was in, that I wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't where I belonged. So that motivated me to seek out an answer. And while identifying that drinking and drugs were, a bad path for me, and I could not handle or control them, so the best solution was abstinence. I started on that path, and did what I was told was necessary for, someone like me to stay abstinent, which was a spiritual program, which is what the 12 steps are, is a spiritual program. I think that I had to actually, for self-preservation, I had to become motivated to really work those steps and to try to apply those to my life and live that way and seek God mainly in order to stay sober. But what happened for me at almost 10 years of sobriety is I never understood that part of my life being unmanageable. Certainly it's unmanageable if I'm drinking and using drugs and being a knucklehead. I mean, that's pretty easy to see that. It was for me anyway. But my life being unmanageable has a lot more to do with I cannot manage happiness or satisfaction out of my life. I can't control it, and I can't. And for me, that manifests. There was never enough. There was never enough. The car wasn't fast enough. There wasn't enough money. There wasn't enough vacations, or, the girlfriend wasn't right. I always wanted more, better, and faster. And there's not enough if you want more, better, and faster, because there's a limit to what you can get, and it just was never enough. So I felt unsatisfied by life, which again was because of my selfishness. And so I had to really go back to embracing the 12-step way of life and focus in on really seeking God in everything. And so to answer your question, I don't know what that thing is that causes somebody to finally say, oh, I can't do this, I need to surrender. It just, and you can try to raise the bar for people and not enable them, and try to bring it to their attention. But at the end of the day, it's just something that happens with each individual, where they finally realize they can't do it on their own and they have to have help. And it's sad to watch when somebody can't surrender.
I think there's something about
and
it.
some people die. I mean, they just can't get it, and I don't know why. And I don't necessarily, because I have such a deep faith that once we die, no matter what the circumstances, we're free.
Yeah.
We're free. And so on some level, I really believe that some of those people that I have to watch suffer and die are put here for that purpose. And that may sound cold, and some people may not like that, and they don't have to agree with it. But I really, that's the only way it makes sense to me, that, their purpose was to provide something for other people through their suffering, but that they're now free.
Yeah.
They're absolutely free and living in the love and the light. If they're not reincarnated, but I don't know really about that. So I don't know.
Those actually, and how quickly. I have so enjoyed the opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, me too. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Is there any, as we are getting ready, just really two more questions. First, just when it comes to spirituality in its like most basic form, what is it that you believe? And secondly, from all that you've learned over your life, of it not necessarily being an easy, straight, narrow, well-paved path, if there was one piece of advice that you would be interested to share with others, what might that be too?
Boy, I know that, and I felt God love within me, that energy, that love that feels like love is within me, and I believe it's within every other living organism on the planet. That energy, that it's all somehow connected and related. And that no matter how an individual looks at that or defines it, whether it be Jesus Christ or or, Allah, or, whatever, great spirit, that it's all the same, that energy just is, that God just is. And that our attempts to define it and put it in a box is understandable, but that gets back to what you alluded to earlier, because then if I can get in a box and know it and understand it, then I won't have to trust it, because now I'll understand it and I can harness it. And I don't think it works like that. I think that it's far beyond what we can comprehend or understand. So I hope that satisfies you on the definition of what I believe. What was your other question? Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
the one thing that love is really all that matters.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that needs no explanation, really. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm. Well, I wish nothing but love and success for you in this new, latest adventure in your life. Both, your love with Stephanie and your families, and also your new business adventure and your continuing spiritual growth and journey.
Thank you. I wish the same for you.
Thank you. And thank you for
Thank you very
sharing
much.
your
Thank you.
perspectives. So thanks to all of you who have been watching or listening for this episode of Dirt Road Divinity. I appreciate it greatly. You can feel free to find these videos on YouTube or, with your favorite podcast provider. You can also join the Facebook group, Dirt Road Divinity, over at Facebook. Look forward to interacting with you there. And until next week, have a beautiful journey.